Welcome to the deep dive. Navigating all the global events, the political shifts, it often feels like trying to see through a thick fog, doesn't it?
It really does. So many contradictions, things changing so fast. It's a lot to keep track of.
Exactly. So our mission today is to try and cut through some of that noise. We've been looking at some recent, pretty impactful discussions covering geopolitics, the Middle East, U.S. domestic issues, and we want to pull out the key insights for you. Think of this as maybe a shortcut to getting a clearer picture, understanding the patterns underneath it all.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots, isn't it? Not just listing events. We've looked at perspectives on these, persistent patterns in the Middle East conflict,
Right.
how that ties into the whole U.S.-Iran dynamic. And then also looking inward at the U.S., the shifts happening here sometimes feels a bit chaotic.
Definitely chaotic. And these threads, they really are linked. Understanding one often shines a light on the others. Okay, so let's dive in. The Middle East first. These persistent patterns of conflict. One really striking observation that comes up is this idea that Israel reportedly violates, pretty much every ceasefire agreement it signs.
Yes, and what's interesting there is how consistently that specific point is made. It's not presented as just, a one-off thing.
Right.
The sources cite examples with Hamas, Lebanon, even going back to Camp David and Oslo. The pattern described is agreements come in phases. Phase 1 gets what Israel wants immediately, maybe hostages back, for instance.
Okay.
Then the later phases, the ones with other obligations, those reportedly get ignored or walked back.
And we saw a recent example, didn't we, that Gaza ceasefire hostages returned, but then other parts of the deal almost immediately shelled by the government, according to reports.
Precisely. It fits that described pattern.
So if that holds true, what does it mean for, future negotiations? Does it make them almost performative?
That's a huge question, isn't it? And it feeds into this other concept, this mowing the lawn idea.
Right. Yes, that term. Originally used for Gaza.
Exactly. But the analysis suggests it's being applied more broadly now. Like in Syria, after Assad's overthrow, reports of systematically neutralizing Syrian military sites, airfields, it's seen as less about solving the conflict and more about maintaining control. Periodic reduction of capabilities.
And the human impact of that strategy, especially in Gaza right now.
Yeah.
It's just devastating. You hear figures like 90% of the population displaced.
Living in tarps, tents, rubble.
It's almost impossible to truly picture that scale of suffering.
It is. And this leads to something really disturbing, what some sources explicitly call the weaponization of starvation.
Weaponization of starvation.
Yeah. Hundreds of thousands reportedly on the brink. There are these accounts of people being lured south, promised aid, and then finding nothing or worse.
And there's this foundation mentioned, the Gaza Humanitarian Aid Foundation. But it's described almost cynically.
As aid washing, yeah. The argument is it's a front, basically, creating a perception of aid to mask deliberate starvation.
That's incredibly bleak. And the details about aid distribution, they sound horrific.
They do. We went from, 400 aid hubs down to just 4 now?
4. That's it.
That's the report. And distribution happens maybe for an hour, often at 2 a.m. Soldiers reportedly firing near crowds, machine guns, mortars mentioned to keep them back, people getting killed or wounded daily just trying to get food.
My God. So what's the underlying goal here, according to these analyses, beyond the immediate horror?
Well, the sources point to a pretty clear objective, driving Palestinians out. Not just from Gaza, but increased activity reported in the West Bank, too.
Driving them out? Where?
The suggestion is towards the Sinai, and there are reports of negotiations with Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, which implies the actual destination isn't the main concern, just that they leave.
So they're faced with this impossible choice: starve or leave.
That seems to be the grim reality presented. Mass starvation versus displacement.
And the analysis suggests no ceasefire, no external pressure is really expected to stop this plan?
Not really. The only thing mentioned that could potentially halt it is a complete cutoff of weapons.
Which the U.S., UK, Germany
show no sign of doing, according to these perspectives. So the strategy appears to be moving forward, largely unchecked by diplomacy.
Okay, let's pivot then. The U.S. and Iran. There's been renewed talk, speculation about the U.S. potentially attacking Iran again.
Yes, that speculation is definitely circulating.
Yeah.
And the stated reason historically for attacks has been the nuclear program.
Right, to set it back.
But the counterpoint raised is, twofold. First, there's reportedly no solid proof Iran is actually building a weapon. They have the right to nuclear energy, of course.
Sure.
And second, those previous strikes, Despite all the hype at the time, they didn't actually eliminate Iran's capabilities. So if the stated goal doesn't quite match the facts or the outcome...
Then you look for other motives.
Right, exactly. And the perspective offered is that it's often been more about regime change, stemming from perhaps a fundamental misunderstanding of Iran by outside powers.
Taking out key leaders, for instance, would fit that regime change narrative.
It's cited as a strong indicator, yes.
So, connecting this to the bigger picture, some fear this isn't just about isolated strikes, but maybe the start of something more sustained.
That's the concern voiced, described as potentially an opening salvo in a feared, permanent, although periodic, war with Iran.
Permanent, but periodic.
Wow. And the view expressed is that Israel will likely work to draw the U.S. deeper into this conflict. It points to a very complex regional dynamic.
And this all happens against the backdrop of the Iran nuclear deal, right?
Yeah.
The one signed under Obama.
Which Iran reportedly stuck to.
Until a previous U.S. administration, as the sources put it, willfully ripped it up.
Correct. Which understandably leads to a lot of skepticism now about any talk of new deals or negotiations.
Yeah, you can see why trust would be low.
Some analyses suggest the public talk, that maybe 2-week lulls for diplomacy. It's all subterfuge. The implication being that neither Israel nor perhaps the U.S. is negotiating in good faith.
Just going through the motions, maybe.
That's the interpretation offered. Diplomacy as a facade while other objectives are pursued.
What a sobering view of international relations. Okay, let's bring this home to American politics, which feels, well, increasingly unpredictable. We see references to the increasingly zany pronouncements and behavior of one prominent figure.
Yeah, the contradictions are pretty stark sometimes, aren't they? Like, turning the White House into an EV showcase, then later saying nobody wants EVs.
Right. Or the falling out with allies. One minute it's BFF with a tech mogul, the next there are threats of deportation.
Or battling a congressman who, arguably aligns with the figure's own supposed agenda. It's described as very...
mafia-like was the term used in one analysis.
Right. Demanding total obsequious loyalty. Anything less, and you're out. No room for disagreement.
And the impact of that style. The argument is it's basically destroyed what's left of the machinery of a democratic system.
And when you hear talk about potentially stripping citizenship from political opponents, that's described as moving at a galloping pace towards repugnant authoritarianism.
Even if the base feels let down by policies like, say, a new bill-cutting programs they might support.
In the system described, their opinion doesn't really seem to matter much at that point. The leader's agenda overrides it.
But this critique, it isn't just aimed at one party, is it? The sources talk about a broader, decayed political system.
Absolutely. The Democratic Party is included in that critique. There was that statistic mentioned. 77% of registered Democrats reportedly wanting an arms embargo on Israel.
Yet that desire is ignored by the party leadership.
Which is described in some analyses as being owned by the Israel lobby. It points to a systemic issue, right, where the base's will often doesn't translate into policy, regardless of party.
So if the established systems are seen as decayed, are there alternative paths emerging? There was mention of that tech mogul again, maybe starting an America party.
Yeah, described as a wounded shark in the water, someone with a lot of money to throw around.
But there's skepticism there too, right? About his actual political skill.
And past attempts to influence elections, say in Michigan or Minnesota, which reportedly didn't pan out despite the cash. Plus, the potential for the federal government to push back, maybe punish him. Money isn't everything in politics.
So where is the hope then, according to these analyses?
Well, it often comes back to grassroots movements. The contrast is drawn with figures like Zohran Mamani in New York.
Ah, the self-described democratic socialist.
Right. Ran this amazing grassroots campaign, got outspent massively, something like 20-1.
Wow.
And still won. Shook up both the Democratic and Republican establishments there. His ads were apparently very effective, especially online.
What was the key to his appeal?
The analysis suggests it was directly addressing the distress that the working poor and the working class are under. Not just rhetoric, but with concrete and real proposals.
Oh, genuine economic populism.
Exactly. That's argued as the best way, maybe the only way, to win back working class voters from what are termed proto-fascists and Christian fascists, addressing the core economic anxieties.
It paints a picture where the entire established ruling class, including old guard Republicans who now back Democrats, like Dick Cheney endorsing a prominent Democrat.
He's seen as basically a corpse.
That was the word used.
Yeah.
Lifeless, Unresponsive to real needs.
So any real hope, any actual change has to come from the ground up.
That's the strong suggestion. From movements that genuinely connect with the economic stagnation, the frustration, the sense of betrayal that so many people feel.
Okay. We've covered a huge amount of ground. From those recurring, frankly disturbing patterns in the Middle East, how they link to U.S. foreign policy, especially with Iran, to the really deep fissures and, frankly, bizarre turns in American domestic politics.
Yeah.
To decay, but also maybe sparks of something new from the grassroots.
It's a lot to take in. And maybe the final thought to leave people with is, well, reflecting on all this, what really stands out to you?
Given these deep patterns, this sense of decay in the established systems, how much power do everyday people really have? Where are the actual levers for change in this incredibly complex picture? Or are there any?
That's the big question, isn't it? Something definitely worth thinking about.